Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is the August 17th, and we have the SIG Node meeting. And today we are continue with the 1.23 planning. Last week we go through a lot of caps. I'm not go to a lot of planning and items, but we didn't finish because out of the time. So today let's start up. Manu, you are on. Thanks.
Sure. So we ended up with C groups V2 last time. So we can continue from the next one on the list. And it's a new CPU manager policy feature was added in 122, and we want to graduate from alpha to beta. Francesco or Swati?
Yep, that's me. This item was actually added by Kevin, and I am okay with that, of course. My only comment on that is a comment/question, which is, I believe we should graduate to beta after the next item, which is from Kevin, gets merged. This is my take. And
okay.
So I will think and keep talking with Kevin about how to properly coordinate that. I think that's the only comment I have.
Okay.
So maybe if you want to add a comment in the doc directly, is that okay?
Yeah, I can.
So which is dependency cap?
Well, yeah, technically they are not related to each other, but I think it just makes sense to promote to beta after this feature is merged. We had another feature which could have benefit from alpha stage, but it seems the author doesn't have the bandwidth. So, but yeah, I will follow it through and sync with Kevin.
All right. So yeah, can you sync with Kevin and update it over here? So
yes, I will, and yes, of course.
Okay. So can you also talk to the next item?
Yes. And during the discussion, which led to the CPU manager policy, Kevin shared that he have some code which he wants to open source, and he said he's going to write a cap to implement this part, which is described there, and it's going to be a new option. And I think it should be more active started next week. So this is what I have, and of course I'm going to help and assist. I'm not sure how it look like from review perspective. I mean, from approver perspective, sorry, but we'll figure it out, I believe.
Just the advantage of this is independent of devices. Is that right?
This specific item should be CPU manager contained only. Yes, if I understood the question correctly.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure. I'll look forward to the cap. I just assume this is so.
Yep.
I don't know if this is tied to power management or something else, but if you were doing NUMA alignment with a device, it feels like you'd naturally balance. So I guess this is handling the case where you don't require a device.
I don't have many more details because he just mentioned it, and looking forward to cap. I will help coordinating though, because Kevin can rarely join this meeting, so I will be happy to bridge the gap.
Okay.
Right. So we can move on to the next one then. Dynamic kubelet config. Sergey.
Yeah, so we announced deprecation in 122. Theoretically, we can remove it code in 123. I just need to understand how to gather feedback. So I didn't hear any like vocal concerns, but we may hear some. So I don't want to start this work too early in a release. Maybe.
Sergey, sorry, I have just a comment, and maybe we'll discuss in tomorrow's CI subgroup meeting, but the only comment I have is there are some tests which want to restart the kubelet and want to change the configuration. So we just need to make sure we cover those use cases. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. So removal includes this like removal of usage as well. And yeah, there is a PR from Artyom already doing some of this work, but we need to just clean up everything. Yeah, definitely part of removal work. I just commented on the fact that I mean, the big problem with deprecation is if somebody using it actively and they just don't have enough time to migrate to the new way to distribute configuration. That's the biggest worry, that we'll get less adoption of Kubernetes because less adoption of new versions because people will be stuck on using dynamic kubelet config on 122 or something. So if you know anybody using this in like real life, not outside the test, please let me know.
But Sergey, I remember when you work on this one, you did find some user, they comment. So you did comment, we are going to deprecate. They never come back to say, oh, we are still using.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's
So,
Alibaba or something like that. Yes.
okay. So for me, I think maybe allowance, we shouldn't wait. Allowance of the deprecation maybe can trigger some people come stand up to say, oh, we are using these things, then we can come back to the similar like last time, we've been talk about the deprecate of the Docker shim for years until we really seriously announced. People didn't ease concern, right? So then after we announced, people ease the concern, we adjust our deprecation time. So I feel we shouldn't hold on the allowance. We should just announce, and then people may be behind. They didn't know, and until we announce, and then they maybe stand up and say, oh, we are using. Then we can understand what's the use cases and make the decision. But at this moment, I think our community don't want to carry on this feature because it's too complicated, and not many people using, and no feedback. Nobody really continue promote to the next phase. So, but let's just announce that. Give people.
Yeah, we already announced that there is a warning on startup when dynamic kubelet config used. I just worry that not everybody tried it yet. So people may not realize that they are in deprecated territory right now. Because we just made the release of 122 with announcement.
Yeah, so this is why I think about announcement actually could make the communication easier. So more people will know. Anyway, just to share here. Yeah.
Okay. So your suggestion is to keep doing it in 123, just try to remove it in 123.
Do we want one more cycle of announcement, Don, or should we just like proceed with the removal now since we announced in 122?
Did we go to the bigger community meeting and make this announcement again, or we just simply? I
can send email to Kubernetes dev, for instance. It may trigger some communication. Let me do that.
Yeah. Let's do that. And if there's no silence, then we just delete as soon as possible. I think that's because we carry on this for so long.
Okay, all right. So we can wait for that announcement and then assign reviewer approval later on. So Docker shim removal again, like we're still waiting and the plan is for 124, right, Sergey?
Yeah, so EKS just announced very recently that they support containerd now, so they can, like, customer can choose to run with containerd. In GK, we pushing customers to migrate for a while now. We discovered so many issues in like edge cases and like big deployments with containerd and how everything works. Like one of the issues we'll discuss today with the metrics and C-advisor. Anyway, so right now we think that 120, like, and another aspect of it is GKE and Azure support Windows with containerd right now. They like, I think Azure saying it's preview. I don't think GKE is saying it's preview. I may be wrong on details. Anyway, so it's just started. As far as I know, there is not much adoption in either cloud, but it's already available to customers. So we expect that with host process in 122, more people will want to use it, and we will see more adoption by end of the year. And it will be easier for us to deprecate Docker shim since Windows customers will have at least some way to not use Docker shim. Yeah, I can prepare more information by for next time if
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
interested.
I captured some notes here.
Yeah,
that's
but I
really-
mean, so, go ahead, Mark.
I was gonna say, yeah, and AKS for Linux nodes continue to use the default and generally available. For Windows, it's in like a public preview, so anybody can opt in. But as mentioned, yeah, we're not seeing a whole lot of adoption at this point.
Yeah,
Or less
good
than
thing
we would
it's-
like to see, I will say.
Good thing we already have a way for customers to not use Docker shim. And 124 is April next year, so we still have time. If we'll see that we will significantly harm customers, we will need to reconsider.
Great, sounds good. So moving on to the next one, pod overhead. So I remember I collected some information from Red Hat, and like Red Hat announced a tech preview of sandbox containers, which is based on Kata, and we're using pod overhead there. So Sergey, did you get anything back from gvisor?
The gvisor currently is not using pod overhead. I think biggest issue is dynamic nature of overhead that we see, and it's hard to get right numbers. And I'm curious, like, what Kata is experience with static pod overhead, how does it work? So this kind of feedback we are looking for. I think Eric sent another note of what he believes pod overhead needs to implement, saying that like it may be, I don't know with Eric on the call, but it may be released as is, G8 as is, but there may be some improvements. But as far as I know, right now there are only use cases Kata. And I wonder what the feedback is.
I also want to add in that the gvisor, the overhead actually is just comparable to the standard of the container shim overhead. So this is why it's no different from when we're using the regular container and container shim. So that's the same overhead. So that's why they are not to lean on to using this one until entire of the Kubernetes by default, Kubernetes community by default enable the pod overhead for just regular container runtime. So this is why there's no dependency.
And my understanding is that it's growing with disk.io usage. So it's really hard to predict what disk.io will be, and we just cannot set a static number.
Okay, and like one more thing, like in case of CRI-O, right, we have a conmon per container. So like basically, if you want to include that in the overhead, we have to scale it for the number of containers in the pod versus a static one. So maybe, I don't know, that could be like a phase 2 thing or something.
Exactly. So that's why it's more like the scale based on the number of the container and the number of the, even some is the number of the pods on the node. And so that's kind of the, so no matter it's gvisor use cases or container D use cases or CRI-O use case, it's all kind of like the Kubernetes community, like SIG Node, have some default option and enable pod overhead. Yeah, but Kata or other things, which is rely on the hypervisor,
right,
and we may have like the stronger use cases here.
Yeah. So maybe
is the explicit near-term ask though just to handle the timeout adjustment, or no, are these other things later?
So Derek, I have no recollection of that item, to be honest. Does anyone?
I'm just trying to understand this text that says lifecycle action defaults
Yeah.
to a time of 30 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, I've forgotten about that one. Does anyone else remember what that referred to? Maybe Eric knows.
Okay.
Or Derek,
never mind. I thought it was sourced from
yeah,
us, so I was just.
It's likely that it got a copy pasted from some other item here.
Derek, did you refer to the last one, last work item, last cap?
I'm just referring to the text that's highlighted on the screen. I didn't know if that was, if it's copy and pasted inadvertently.
Yeah, I think it's a copy paste issue. Yeah. So I think an option here maybe like to GA what we have and then do a phase 2 where we have a more dynamic pod overhead. I don't know what we feel about that.
Do we have like this because uncharged pod overhead cause production issues so badly? I feel the reason it is the pod overhead initially initiated by the SIG Node is just back then, and we have a lot of uncharged and accounted usage, right? Because especially in the old time, there have when we first at the earlier stage define of the CRI, so there's a lot of pod overhead, and so that's why. But over time, we did a lot of optimization on our container runtime, and like I can see that every block, and when Nantao working on that one, and there's the huge dramatic improvement. I believe same thing applied to the CRI. And and the same thing for the gvisor and also hyper IO, all those kind of things. So do we still feel like they're so strong? We have to solve this immediately solve this pod overhead problem. So far, I haven't seen a lot of cases cause the system over out of memory, out of CPU because unaccount usage by the user space. But there's of course always have the account resource usage like memory, right? So that's the by kernel. So, but we do have the node allocatable, try to kind of like capture some of those things. Do we still have like the syswom in our production because, and also caused by not very good node config, all it is, we do think about this pod overhead is huge. We have to account, except the kata use cases, and we have to account somewhere, and so we could have the better eviction and to save protect our load from the syswom or out of CPU situation. My question is basically just reply to the Manu's earlier questions. Do we start the second phase?
Yeah, so we have the need to track overhead related to the runtime choice, particularly for kata. The thing I want to call out here, and I'm wondering why this wasn't called out in the SIG-Arch stuff, was there's also supposed to be a project-wide clock on like avoiding perma-beta status, and pod overhead did add fields into the pod spec, yet for some reason it wasn't called out in the related SIG-Arch KEP that said things need to either graduate or get out. Pod overhead went beta in 1.18, but I think if I would rather move forward with graduating in its present capability than being stuck in a perma-beta status. So I'm trying to find the SIG-Arch KEP on perma-beta, but we should make sure we're not going to, by delaying this, be at risk to this KEP that I placed in the Zoom.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Phase 2 can be addressed later. This at least solves a kata case where kata is like going to production.
I wasn't here before. I'm sorry. This is Eric. I second, I suppose, what Murnal is suggesting. While it is dynamic, particularly from a CPU perspective, I think that can be challenging. But just for the memory side, it's pretty critical. So I think as is, there's plenty of utility, and I'd be happy to move it forward. I'm not sure what to suggest otherwise, or people do have feedback, you know, in the gvisor case as far as what could be done on the dynamic side. But again, I think that they're probably is one way to deal with that for CPU.
So Eric, we lost you for some sentences. So, but it sounds like you agree with Derek right here. So, we move forward to graduate this to GA. Then we can come back later for the phase 2. Is that right? Because we.
Can you clarify phase 2 for me? I apologize.
So Manu, maybe you want to, because
so maybe Eric, things like, oh, okay, we have a conmon per container, so it's not really static and cryo, it's more dynamic. So anything that is more dynamic than the static overhead we defined today, that would be like a phase 2, and we don't have to address it right now. We can do it separate from what we have. We just go GA with this for now.
Great, I agree with that. I think that's good.
Okay.
Because yeah. So it's great as is. I'll wait for perfection.
Okay.
Yeah, looks like we are reach agreement here. Yeah. Then it's maybe just add 1 line, say, oh, here's the maybe have the phase 2, but it's later. But we plan to, as the SIG Node community, we plan to graduate this as is with the static overhead configurations. Yep. So then we can solve the existing problem for kata. This is what I mentioned at the phase 2. Yeah, could be perfect, but it's take long run to get there. And also, so far I didn't say the urgent needed, but I do say the kata need this one. This is one of the reasons we start.
Yep, sounds good. I captured that. No.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah.
So the next one is Windows privileged containers. Mark?
Yeah, I can talk to this. So this enhancement hit alpha in 122. So going for the alpha implementation, we relied on annotations over most of the CRI calls. And for beta, we are going to remove those annotations and plumb all of this through Containerd and HCS shim directly. So majority of the work for going to beta for this enhancement is in other components outside of Kubernetes, but we're going to be updating the, I'm going to start updating the KEP for a beta release, regardless of if we target beta for 123 or not. Right now, the biggest risk is having a Containerd release with all of the changes that we need in to support these host process containers. So I'm going to be doing work like we're planning on progressing it to beta in 123, but that's a big if right now based on timelines of other projects, if that makes sense.
It's also a minor risk. I mean, it's likely that we'll have a release by this 1-2-3 time frame. It's just we don't have a hard plan yet.
Okay.
If we have a need for it, we'll have a hard plan. Let's put it that way. Okay,
that's good to know. Yeah, we're also there's a number of updates in the HCS shim that we're also kind of working through, mainly around how container volumes are set up for these privileged containers too. So that is good to know.
Thanks, Mark, and keep us the update. And anyway, like Nanto and myself, at least will be on this KEP and also PS. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Great. So the next one we discussed last time, and that needs like follow up in SIG Node. So maybe we'll wait for that presentation before we make any decisions on that. So kubelet credential providers. So either Aditi or Andrew on the call.
Yeah, I can comment on this one. I think we were targeting beta in the last release, and we made quite some improvements in the caching and the concurrency of the exec plugins. One of the things that we just missed was getting an actual CI job to have some good test coverage for this plugin mechanism. And so I think Aditi is going to be doing some work to add the CI job for 1.23. And hopefully that'll put us in a good spot to promote this to beta.
Okay. So sizing, is it like medium? Well, small, medium, large, and priority, I would guess, is medium or a high.
So this is kind of this feature cuts kind of multiple SIGs. I think from a SIG node, maybe it's not super high priority. From the cloud provider SIG, we're trying to prioritize this pretty high because it's part of the whole like removing cloud provider capabilities that are built into or compiled into all the core Kubernetes components. And this is one of the like lingering kubelet features that have like a first class integration into certain public clouds. So from that perspective, it's going to be high. From a t-shirt size, I guess like a medium, just because the amount of work required and the maintenance for the CI job is not clear yet.
Okay.
Andrew, are you?
Yeah, I remember.
Are you going to be doing the CI job, or is somebody else working with you to do this? Because
yeah, Aditi is working on it, I think, and I'm going to be helping her and trying to get this into beta.
Okay, cool.
Right. So
yeah, the last I heard from Aditi, she was kind of struggling with figuring out how to do that well.
Yeah, that's part of the complexity of this, is that we can't rely on kubelet to pull an image that has the binaries and the plugins in place, because the kubelet would need the plugin to authenticate and get the image. So like we have to do a bunch of work like deep in the weeds of like Cloud Init and the way these like the VMs are provisioned on Google Cloud, and get the plugin installed on the nodes that the kubelet can then actually use the plugin as part of authenticating to image registries. So yeah, like it gets really complex as we get into like the test infrastructure and all that to get this working.
right. Do we have any reviewers, approvers identified? So Andrew, are you going to be reviewing it, or you'll be more involved in the implementation and the work itself?
I can review that.
Okay, sorry, who spoke up?
Danielle.
Oh,
Danielle.
okay. All right, thanks, Danielle. Okay. Okay, we're down to the last item on the list, exec probe timeout. Sergey, I'm going to talk to that one.
Yeah, so I added this item again because we need to lock the feature at some point. Unfortunately, right now, there are so many customers that using exec probe with gRPC calls, for instance, or something like that, that it's really hard to just change the behavior on them and enforce timeout. We see many people being broken by enforcing it. And even worse, if you just set a really high timeout, it still changes the behavior, especially for containerd, when before it wasn't accounted, like response value wasn't taken into account. So people may like fail the probe, but it still reports success. With a really high timeout, it would be that people like that containers will start receiving this failure and start crashing container. So change the behavior in any case. Like if you enforce a flag and just set a very high value, it will be a problem. And if you just enable it and keep the default 1 second value, it's still crashing, like may break customers. And the usage-wise, there are so many people using gRPC exec probe, like just too many of them. So still breaking customers. That's why I just put it into the list to make sure that we're tracking this work, and we're tracking some like resolution, like pushing customers to use something else. But I don't know, like when we can lock this feature and just don't give an option to fall back to original behavior any longer.
I know, Sergey, we'd also like to work on the probe timeout values. It would be nice if they were a little more atomic as opposed to per second kind of thing. There's probably a lot of improvements we can do here. Maybe if you and I can get together and talk about it and try to navigate a way forward from the existing behavior to something more fine grained, and
Okay, yeah, definitely good directions. Like maybe if you'll give extra features to customers, then they will
exactly
will force them to migrate.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping to. Yep.
Okay.
Oh,
you.
but this
I will
one works
set
the
something
way
up.
it's supposed to this time. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe we can come back to SIG Node, the results of that discussion. More
Yeah,
discussion.
sounds good, Murno.
Okay, okay.
But it
Great.
looks like in the 1.23, we don't have clear plan for this one, right?
No, I think we need to keep allowing customers to fall back to original behavior.
Okay. So I think thank you everyone for participating in this discussion, and let's move to next one because for timing. And Kamala, do you want to start talk about the just 1 second, sorry. Let me see.
Yeah. Okay, hi, this was discussed before, but on the PR, I got few comments from Clayton and thought to discuss in the node, but I don't see Clayton here. Maybe I'll check with him and shift to the next meeting, because since he has most of the comments, I don't want to just have a discussion without him. Is that fine?
Okay, I'll also poke Clayton to see if we can make sure he attends next week.
Sure. Yeah, I'll also check. I'll also check with him on that. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Kamala, and also Derek. And hopefully next week we can talk. So David and Peter, maybe you want to talk about the SigAdvisor CI integration.
Sure. Yes, this is me and Shintong have wanted to bring this up. Yeah, so kind of the context here is we've been working at GK on a lot of the kind of the containerd work and migrating customers to containerd, and we've noticed some issues in SigAdvisor where some metrics are missing for various things. And so to get these metrics, basically we actually need to talk to containerd in the CRI API from SigAdvisor. And so traditionally, SigAdvisor has never really talked to the CRI API. It's only talked to the containerd API or the Docker API or Cryo API directly. So the problem comes in is that basically we have kind of a dependency issue because SigAdvisor is currently vendored into Kubernetes every release, right? It's compiled in. And the CRI API is actually also in Kubernetes itself in the staging repo. So basically, due to the kind of that issue that SigAdvisor is vendored into Kubernetes and CRI API is part of Kubernetes staging itself, if we include a dependency of CRI API, like the proto definitions in SigAdvisor, we kind of have a circular dependency, and we can't actually include it. So this basically presents us kind of in our current challenge, which basically means we can't include or use the CRI API at all from SigAdvisor. So that's kind of where we are right now. Yeah, and then Shintong, do you want to add anything kind of like the issues you've been working on and why this is helpful maybe?
Yeah, this is Shintong. The CRI in SigAdvisor can help in a few places. Like we can get the container status in a more straightforward way rather than depending on the container label passed by kubelet. And also if we integrate CRI, the file system metrics can be fetched in a more efficient way rather than it, because CRI has an internal cache for the file system metrics. So so if we're depending on that, it'd be cheap to get the metrics in SigAdvisor. Yeah, that's the context.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like we kind of have two issues already where we kind of want to use the CRI containerd API from SigAdvisor. So yeah, like the file system metrics is one because otherwise we can't cache the results, and the other one is to get some of the metadata about the running containers, like the restart count and stuff. So anyways, kind of what we were proposing, I chatted a little bit with Dims, who's kind of like a big expert on like a lot of the Go module and kind of dependency stuff. And so one of the things he brought up was it's actually been apparently I wanted to get a little bit more context. One of the ideas that's been going on in the community for a while is potentially moving the CRI API out of a staging repo and into its own GitHub repo. So outside of the KK repository directly. That would actually solve this issue, because then C-Advisor could directly depend on the dependency, and Kubernetes itself could depend on that separate repository. So that was one kind of idea that Dim's brought up as a solution to kind of this circular dependency issue. So I kind of wanted to wonder, I wanted to ask, I guess, like, has this been brought up before? And what's anyone's thoughts on this? And kind of, I don't know, is there any big issues with this, and what's kind of the cost associated with doing something like that?
Yeah, can I ask a question? So like today we obviously published the CRI API out from staging into a dedicated repo, just Kubernetes CRI API. What I was trying to understand was when the CRI can report usage stats for your containers, like my understanding is I thought we were on a path to try to eliminate C-Advisor from being in that flow at all from the kubelet side, and then the CRI implementation itself could have done it. So I'm wondering what is expected to be the source of truth for these metrics and the topology you're all.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think long term, you're completely right. So long term, we have a cap that, like I'm working with Peter on, for example, and we're trying to move those metrics out to the CRI implementation in such a way that basically the CRI implementation itself will be responsible for reporting these metrics, not C-Advisor. So long term, we don't expect that people will really want to use C-Advisor to collect these type of metrics, right? They'll just talk directly to the container runtime, so to containerd or cryo, and those directly will report the metrics.
Yeah, it's been a while since I looked at this code, but, and maybe Mernal, you can help jog memory here, but like I'm trying to think. So our deployment is basically, we run cryo, but we're still using C-Advisor as a source of truth for metrics within Kubernetes. And I was trying to think back when we wrote the C-Advisor cryo integration, why we didn't have the same issue.
Yes, I took a look at the cryo integration in C-Advisor, and it looks like it doesn't include the changes directly. It talks to the HTTP API of cryo and gets some data there. So it doesn't include any of the definitions or anything like that.
I remember when we add cryo, actually we get all the stats from C-Advisor from the beginning. That's why C-Advisor has everything. But for containerd, we start with getting stats from CRI first, and then we found that some stats are missing. Then we go to C-Advisor, only add those missing stats. That's why for C-Advisor containerd support, there are only a small set of stats metrics supported there. But for cryo, because we start with C-Advisor integration first, maybe there are more metrics, and they're already there.
Hey, so this is Peter. Cryo, the way that, C-Advisor basically pings like a totally separate endpoint, like independent of the CRI right now, to get all that it needs to basically then pretend like it's the lib container handler. So like gets like the PID of the container and to get the network stats, and where the root FS is to get the disk stats.
It'll take to get there. Oh, oops, sorry about the recording. Yeah, so I think that's the question, and I'm guessing if there's been, because I guess this is kind of a general issue with any other dependency, basically. So the current story is basically any dependency that's vendored into Kubernetes, it can't depend on any staging module. So if there's any other use case, right, where C-Advisor or some other staging module needs to depend on CRI, it can't do that because it's in staging. So I guess I wanted to understand just in general, like if moving a CRI out of staging is something that was ever considered, because Dim said this was actually an eventual goal that we wanted to do, just independent of this. So I'm just trying to understand if that's kind of what the
just
status
add
of that is.
just add another example. Actually, today Kubernetes vendors containerd code, and it's 1.4. But once we upgrade to 1.5, the containerd will directly import CRI. It will be in the same position with the divider. So it's just that we have, based on what Jordan told me, just that we haven't upgraded containerd yet. Once we upgrade, we will face this issue immediately.
Yeah.
So
it's
not just an issue to say about it.
I was just trying to think through the mechanics of doing it, right? Like if we wanted to, I think we all want to ensure that the CRI is still versioned with Kubernetes. Like that was the reason we embarked on the project. And so having it right now in staging meant that what was there was what was versioned with that release. Now with this, I guess, dependency graph problem, if we decouple it from KK, we would need to be very careful about when we actually version its subsequent branch. So I was just trying to think through the mechanics of it. Like when there's numerous KEPs that we've gone through in the last 2 weeks where folks want to modify the CRI. How do we want to proceed on that? And is there a particular time in the release cycle where we would need to ensure that it's cut so both cAdvisor and others can update? That's all I was just trying to think through.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, yeah, that's kind of the challenge with splitting it out, is it would have its own release cycle. But the way I could see it is like, toward the end of the cycle, people would make their changes in the CRI repo, update the CRI, and then back in Kubernetes, just bump it to the next version. So something like that.
But that would mean like a feature
case,
dates, like feature freeze dates in the release process. We would have to propagate that through a number of repos.
Well, you could also just create a branch there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would become basically an external dependency of Kubernetes, just like, container or cAdvisor is today, where it would just be included as a Go module at a specific version.
Maybe it is different, but we do have the Xing and the Xiangqians here today from the storage. They have the CSI, and recently some SIG storage team mentioned to me like the CSI, and also have a lot of like the lingering dependency issue and also release issue. So maybe they can share some from their CSI. And at least I think this is David, I understand the cAdvisor dependency issue, but it looks like the CSI even have more. So maybe they can share how they are going to address that problem.
Yeah, that'd be great to understand. Yeah, if anyone else has similar issue.
Xiangqian, and are you still here?
I'm here. Hi everyone. Thanks for having us over here, Don. So long story short, this Xin and I are working on a CAP to try to enable users to send arbitrary send signals to arbitrary containers in any running on any node. This CAP is called container notifier. It has been there, I don't know, 2 years maybe.
Sorry, Xiangqian, actually I will ask you about the CSI dependency issue. Maybe you know, because there's some also have these similar things, what we have. So sorry, we haven't get there yet. We're still on the cAdvisor topic, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was.
Okay. Yeah, so we do have a dependency on this container storage interface. So if you look at the KK repo, right, so we do have that in the Go module. So it's like every time we have a release, we go to Kubernetes to go to KK and update that. Basically, I think that's what I do. I'm not sure what else you're looking for.
I guess the main question would be around like versioning and how do you kind of sync that external release to the Kubernetes, like in terms of timeline and during the release cycle.
So like sometimes we do some development on the the CSI repo. So like let's say we are developing some new feature, right? Let's say for 1.22, if we need to make some changes in the CSI, we try to align that. So there is this, definitely there is this coordination. So try to get that in so that we can use that in KK. But since we do have some control over that repo ourselves, but definitely we do need to align those two together if there is something that we need in tree. So we need to cut the release on CSI side first and then use it.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Looks like thanks. Actually, one of those like the Sada recently shared with me, he so regret CSI in a separate repo. But I will ask him to get more data and why it's regret, because the
regret CSI in a different repo. You want CSI to be internal. SAD? Who is them? Sorry.
So the most concern is like the how to collaborate with the release and like the timeline, all those kind of things. Actually, it's a lot of the process work.
Right. That is true. I think definitely there are pros and cons, right? I mean, if everything's internal, so we actually moved, or we are in the process of moving all the entry drivers off the tree as well, right? Because the CSI is out of the tree and all the CS drivers are out of the tree. So to decouple the drivers from Kubernetes, because if they're together, you have other issues. If there's any problems in your driver, then you have a bug in Kubernetes, in the core Kubernetes, right? So that's also a big problem. So there are, I would say there are problems in either way you go.
Yeah, that's true. So we just try to figure out all the pros and cons, and then make the decision for the best, right? For not perfect, but the best solution for community.
I'm not a Go expert, but I don't know whether it's possible that we do some Go module magic to like keep the CI in the repo, but break the dependency by, for example, defining a separate Go module file or something like. Yeah, I'm not sure. Just some idea.
We definitely cannot. Oh, sorry, David. Can we watch a little bit? I just want the time checking, and I think we cannot solve this problem. We have to more discussing, and
yeah, for sure,
maybe
completely agree.
Yeah, we need to start email thread on this one, and then come back to the SIG Node. If we reach some consensus and collect enough pros and cons, then we come back to here, discuss that again. Is that okay? Because
yeah, it makes sense. Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, set up a call with Lantal and Dims. And the answer to Lantal, yes, we can do that with the Go mod in a subdirectory, right? So
yeah. So let's move to next topic. Thanks everyone for participating in this one. Then Matt, do you want to quick talk about the Keystone? And I know you sent us the type, but I haven't looked at it yet. I'm not sure who have take a look. And
yeah, I haven't had a chance to read the KEP yet. What I was hoping was if we could have some time to review the KEP. And I don't know if we could fit that discussion in 7 minutes, but I did want to, if it was okay, to see if we could also then make sure that we had time to share some questions or feedback on the pod.
No, sure. Aditi did the PR today, so then we can discuss in the PR. If you can just assign someone to review, and then we can advance asynchronously.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. So if it's okay, Don, Seth and I caught up this morning on the container notification KEP, and he hadn't had a chance to, well, I see he just copied it on the PR now, but I was hoping that the KEP authors were maybe able to talk through some of the questions. So Seth, do you want to guide through this, or do you want me, or it's up to you?
Yeah, I mean, I can. So, I mean, we were looking at it, and while the implementation can be done in phases, the design has to kind of be considered. All three phases kind of have to be considered, because phase one makes the change to the pod spec. And once we start down that road, it'll be kind of hard to undo it. And so I was compiling these this morning, and I meant to put them in the cap earlier, but yeah, but basically, there's always been scalability concerns I've had with this, in that phase one, they're talking about writing a controller whose logic would eventually be incorporated into the kubelet. And Slack has, oh goodness, okay, yeah. Zoom is messing with me. Like if I switch workspaces, it shrinks the Zoom window down real small. So just in terms of the notification mechanism, it's kind of a one-shot thing where lots of things in Kubernetes are kind of reconciling. You know, you got spec, you got status, but in this case, spec is kind of like you're defining. It's more like a job, right? It's more like it's a one-shot thing. It's going to attempt it at resource creation time. And if things aren't the way that it expects, then it will fail. And the ordering matters, right? So like if you create a notification, then you create the pod that would receive that notification. The pod notification's probably already failed because the pod didn't exist at the time you created the pod, not a notification, right? And so it's very ordered. And some of that is concerning, especially if there's like a notification, like a higher level notification controller that is watching for pod creation, right? And is going to send a notification to the pod immediately upon its, and this is something that's not specified in the spec. It's like, does the pod get the notification when the container that has the notification becomes ready, or when the whole pod becomes ready, or what? Either way, there's something that's going to be racing to exec into that pod as soon as it either gets created or becomes ready. And that is concerning. And then I was talking with Derek about it, and I mean, there needs to be rate limiting mechanisms, several of them, where like you can only create so many pod notifications at a time. Otherwise, you can denial of service the kubelet in the container runtime. You know, if you happen to create 100 pod notifications against 100 pods running on a single node, well, that kubelet's going to get swamped. And if it is the kubelet's job to update all of these pod notification resources, then it's going to exhaust its QPS and fall behind in updating like actual pod statuses and things like that. So there's concerns in terms of its scalability and like the exact mechanics when you get down to you know how things are going to work in order. Derek, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so like I would love for us to have a way of saying like two things. So like right now, pod notifications, if we had a way to tie that to the Kubernetes node authorizer so that we knew that it was only listing and watching notifications that were bound to pods in that kubelet, then at least we would know that the kubelet had seen that pod before acting on it. I also was generally concerned, like I'm dealing with a lot of scalability issues of just like liveness probes, readiness probes, and execs generally eating up a large amount of resource on the node. And this just felt like another scalability concern that was unclear about how to size. And so I was curious if there was any motivations or thoughts on adding some type of mission control that would say for any given pod, there is only allowed to be 1 or 2 active pod notification resources for it. And then at kubeAPI server at mission time, all others would be rejected. And like, given the one-shot nature of this, that might be a good way as a node admin to know how to scale this feature. The other thing was just, it was unclear if a container had been restarted or not. If a notification by reading the API, that notification was received by a particular container ID or not. So I think in one of the feedbacks you'll see in the note, hopefully that Seth and I transparent, was just, is there a way to know which container running instance received that notification or not in the pod notification status. Then like which containers were viable, pod notification targets, like were init containers viable or not? Were ephemeral containers going to be viable notification targets or not? I think we both presumed no, but getting clarity on that was also helpful. But I think anything we can do to talk about how we can restrict unbounded pod notification growth for each given pod would be really appreciated before we move forward on this, in my view. And so
thanks, Derek. And Seth, just to try to answer a couple of your questions. In terms of animation control, to restrict number of actively execute pod notification, this is not in the first phrase, because the first phrase is going to be rely on an external controller to trick off all this, but rate limiting is certainly concerned. Is certainly considered.
I don't know if that's
one.
sufficient, and I only feel that way. Like we should document some garbage collection strategy for it, and not tie it till later, because like understanding the garbage collection strategy would inform how clients then use this. As an example, I've been administering clusters where other add-on components to our environment very quickly destroyed etcd, unintended. And I'm just trying to think, like when we add a new per pod, per node API, if we don't have some garbage collection strategy up front, I'm not sure we know our usage pattern well enough. And so I would just push back softly if we could define a garbage collection strategy, even if that's putting a TTL on that resource.
Okay, we'll take a look on that and revisit, come back on that.
Okay.
Also, the second question was regarding to whether a container get notified or not. This is actually included in the status. So there's a condition telling it whether each content, sorry, there's a condition array in the status of the pod notification. It can tell you whether a specific container has been notified or not.
It didn't seem to match to the container ID that's in the pod status.
Yeah, it has the container
should
name.
have something.
It had container name, but not ID. So it didn't seem to be time and space aware. And so we thought you might want to make it have both name and ID and status to match what's in pod status.
Okay, that's a great one. Okay, I'll take a quick look on that and come back on that.
Okay.
Other than this,
maybe I want to ask one thing. I think what Fez earlier raised the concern, which is a valid concern. He thinks because the phase one, it is just update of the pod spec. So once we update that one, even if it's just only implement phase one, we still have to live with that, right? So that's kind of like the one concern he raised is valid. But on the other hand, I also want to say that I do think about the phase one relative to safer, and even some of the phase two together, because Sean can please correct me. I think about that's a little bit misleading, phase one, phase two, because later I read the last of the alpha, beta planning. I think about your current alpha actually have the phase one plus some of the phase two. Because you did mention that the container notifier controller somewhere and in your alpha, so that's, but on the other hand, I do think about maybe it's okay because in your current notifier object, you did say we want to a list of the container notifier, but then to me, please explain to me, maybe I misunderstand. You do think about for that notifier handler, we are defining a list of the command. We are not like arbitrary user customize those commands. And so that's making me think about we are tied with the one use case or two use cases. It's not the arbitrary things there. So which is,
go
ahead, Sean.
So there are there are a couple of phrases over here. So the first phrase, more or less the targeted use case is to be able to execute quiet commands against a particular container. And the second phrase is to limit set of signals, basically predefined list of signals that a user can define to the container. So to answer your question, yes, it's going to be a limited set.
Exactly. So that's why to that one, I think about the at least the maybe entire of the life cycle of this feature, or maybe just at least the initial. I think this is one dramatically narrow down the scope and have the bounded impact on the node based on that one. But I understand our concern. So because I also is one of those risk concern initially, but I think about at least with the current proposal, we basically could do the bounded things. We could just say, oh, what kind of command is safe, and what kind of use cases is have the high demanding. So we could just only support those things, and the rest of the stuff is blocked.
Just want to be clear, like the feedback that Seth and I talked through in this, it's not antagonistic towards the feature. It was more, we were really trying to scope it from a sizing and like a resource sizing standpoint. So, and then just like I said, we weren't clear if you had a way as a consumer of the API to know that the actual existing running container had been the one that received the notification or not. But I would be hard pressed to put this feature on in production in my own environments right now, unless I could better understand how I can constrain its usage on a per pod basis. So like the one tweak, if we could explore it, was just the number of pod notifications per pod, which felt tractable in an emission. And it's not something we could handle cleanly with resource quota today, because like pods, pod notifications could span many pods in a namespace that might span many nodes. And so I kind of wanted a way of capping resource usage per node per pod. And execs in particular are super expensive, we're discovering in practice in many environments. So having some way to rate limit that was our main feeling. But
yeah, Shin and I really appreciate all the feedback. Right, don't worry about us. We will make whatever adjustments that fits the best. And then let me go back and discuss with Shin a little bit more on this. We'll see whether we can change some of the APIs to, first of all, identify the container using ID instead of container name. That's the one. And the second thing is I think the major concern really lies in the performance. So and also rate limiting. How can we effectively not letting this single controller to break everything or take a node down, etc. That's I assume this is your main.
When a notification is actually expected to be initiated, does the container need to be ready or not yet ready?
Right.
Where in its life cycle is it expected to be?
Right. We will have that document in the CAP, and I'm glad that this come back to the discussion. So the only thing is that it has been there for a little while. It typically takes a little bit long trip to get the feedback. So I really appreciate if you two, Thes, Don, and Derek, or whoever in this community, respond to the CAP updates if we made the changes, and then that way we can adapt to your suggestions. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I assume all these are questions you'd hit in the implementation, and yeah, we want to be able to support progress on this. So yeah, thank you for hearing the feedback.
I have to join another meeting, so I think thanks for everyone for attending today's meeting, and yeah,
all the best.
So we can continue. Yeah.
Thank you all. I will follow up on that.